At least I don't think so. If he is, he's doing a pretty good job of hiding it.
Thank you very much, Chris. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So please do take your seats. We're going to be cracking on right on with our next session. We're going back to back, packing in the content, packing in the important insights. So this next session, future focus, keeping launches on track for green, electric and connected supply chains. When we talk about the industry and its journey, we talk about its transition and its pathway towards electric, emission-free, and a connected future. But really, when it comes to logistics and supply chain, that focus doesn't need to be in the future. That focus needs to be today, enabling, preparing, and accelerating the industry's transition, and crucially, at a time of uncertainty, making sure that that transition is viable for car makers, for suppliers, for the whole ecosystem. Here in Mexico, the rise of EV importers from brands like ALSC Mexico, BYD, Geely, MG, and many others have seen a dramatic rise over the last year or so. And those with established footprints already here in Mexico have either started or are preparing, just as we heard from BMW, but also clearly from the likes of Volkswagen, General Motors, Jack Motors, General Motors, and many others, Ford too. So clearly the future is now when it comes to this, and in logistics and supply chain the focus really needs to be deep dived and planned. So here with me today I've got a great panel of experts to talk us through how Mexico can prepare, how it can transition to this future, ensuring it's competitive, viable, and as efficient as possible. So my first guest I'd like to welcome on stage began his career in communications and government affairs at Audi Mexico, and has worked for Lego before joining PACCAR Mexico in 2018, where he oversees customs and trade, government affairs, regulatory compliance, corporate social responsibility, and operational excellence. Please welcome to the stage my first guest, Javier Villegas, PACCAR Mexico.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Please have a seat.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So my next guest has more than 20 years' experience in automotive logistics across sales, operations, and general management. He started his career with General Motors, and since worked at logistics and technology companies including Syncreon, Neovia Logistics, KRP Partners, and in his current role at DP World, he oversees automotive logistics, strategy and operations, streamlining end-to-end supply chains and optimizing vehicle transportation for the global network. Please welcome to the stage my next guest, David D'Annunzio of DP World.
Good morning, everyone.
David, welcome.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
And my next guest, and someone I've already mentioned in my opening intro, one of the important importers, has more than 25 years' experience in automotive OEM and retail industry, expertise in supply chain and sales planning. He's represented more than 10 brands in the Mexican market, including having spent 13 years with Toyota. He joined ALSC Mexico in 2022, the e-mobility division of the Solar Ever Group, and has become the CEO earlier this year of ALSC Mexico. So please welcome to the stage my next guest, Juan Cedera. Juan, please take a seat.
Hello again.
Great to have you here. And last but certainly not least, with more than 20 years' experience in logistics, covering production management and automotive industry operations. He's based in Europe and served at logistics specialists, including Gebruder Weiss and Jeffco, before joining DB Schenker in May of 2015. He currently leads the company's e-mobility initiatives and business development for electric vehicle production and suppliers. Please welcome to the stage Christian Moser of DB Schenker.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Hello again. Christian, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Richard, hi.
Good to see you. Great. So we've got, as you can see, we've got a raft of experience, expertise, a real great mix of stakeholders here, all integral to the development of the e-mobility future here in Mexico, North America, and beyond. So we're going to maximize this time and get straight into the details, into the questions. Javier, I'm going to come to you first. PACCAR Mexico has been producing electric vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles, or trucks, for a number of years now.
Correct.
Perhaps you can start by just sharing a little bit about that portfolio and how you've adapted your logistics and supply chain accordingly.
Thank you, Richard. So you might know us for our commercial brands in Mexico as Kenworth, also DAF starting in 2024. So we are a centenary-year-old company, so we're joining that exclusive group with GE, Coca-Cola, and you might know as well Disney. So we're part of that select group of 100-year-old companies. So along that way, we've learned quite a lot. So all the way back from regular diesel engines, all the way up to hydrogen fuel engines. So this has taken us a long way up, and definitely in Mexico, you have to separate light vehicles, which are consumer goods, and commercial vehicles, which are actually capital goods. They are business-wise an element to run a business. So therefore, since 2019 in Mexico, we became the first commercial vehicle company to build full EVs in Mexico in our factory in Mexicali, Baja California. And we've learned quite a lot. Actually, I was seeing on the billboards Trayecto, kudos for you guys. They are the first one adopting our heavy-duty EVs in Mexico since this year, 2024. But also, they committed long way back. We see decarbonization as an option. So I would ask the audience, what do you want, electrification or decarbonization? Let's start with that. To decarbonize, there's a long way and a different option of portfolio that we can run. So it goes from regular diesel, ULSD, compressed natural gas engines, which actually Trayecto has one of the biggest fleets in Mexico, decarbonizing 40% less than regular diesel engines. And then we go to electric and hydrogen fuel vehicles, which we have a partnership with Toyota since 4 years ago, and we've been running prototype tractor trucks in Long Beach Port and in Los Angeles. So there are different options. Let's see this as a business, and definitely let's talk with what the logistics sector needs. It's different if you have a last mile delivery business than if you have a long haul delivery business. So definitely there's a long way to talk about.
Yeah, excellent. And then great to see how your products are integrating into the automotive supply chain and supporting that transition. Juan, I want to come to you next. Sev's Mexican journey only started a few years ago when the company entered the market, importing EVs from China. Fast forward a few years to here today, and that's all set to change with plans for domestic production from next year, I believe. So it'd be great to hear an update from you, a little bit about those plans and the new opportunities coming that way.
Definitely. Thank you for the intro. Always very kind. Always nice to see you here. Year and a half. I think it's been a little bit less than that. And I'm going to speak to you from the scope of what we are involved in on a daily basis. We operate on the idea that the EV transition is inevitable. That's what we do. That's what we believe. We don't call ourselves a car company. We call ourselves a clean tech company. And the reason why we call ourselves that is we're involved in the whole ecosystem, from the assembly and distribution and selling of solar panels to the energy storage batteries to the cars that use this energy. So we see the whole ecosystem, not just the car. It's been a trip, I can tell you that. And what we do realize is the Mexican customer, like any other customer, regardless of use, language, road conditions, is always attracted to a good deal. It's always attracted to a quick or a better return on investment. So EVs make perfect sense. And when you map that out with the solar panels and the green generation and the renewable, then it makes even more sense. The panel right before us was speaking about information. And for all of you guys involved in the supply chain information, here's what I see now. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be true for the next 5 or at least 10 years. For a very brief moment, components of the car, I mean the battery, I mean the drivetrain, I mean the engine, are going to be pretty much the same. It's not going to be as complicated as the ICE vehicles you now see. So the standardization of the information is going to last only so long. And then when more players come into and the batteries get more complicated and the drivetrains get huge, then the logistics is going to come back to the complicated world we know today. So this is a logistics forum. If I could add a little bit of tip for you, this is my take. EV migration is inevitable, and we have a very limited time to take advantage of how similar things are in these cars, regardless of the brand. Take advantage of it. It's going to go away.
Yeah, great, thank you. And as I understand, the plans for the plant in Durango coming online next year will make that transition from importer to domestic producer, and that's going to have a significant impact on your logistics, clearly.
That is true. We're running some tests now. As you know, we have 3 factories of solar panels in Mexico. We're doing some tests of the first vehicles yet. We don't plan to roll that out for the end of this year, but most likely before we end first half next year, we have some surprises regarding local production for EVs in Mexico.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And Christian, coming to you as a global logistics provider, you're supporting manufacturers often making that journey from importer to local producer in other regions, perhaps some more further along in their electromobility journey. So keen to understand from your perspective, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned and how you're supporting those customers make that transition?
So first of all, thank you for having me. And one of the key, let's say, lessons we learned is, first of all, and it was rather surprising, how naive companies are when they enter a new market, not considering the local environment. A lot of copy-paste thinking is going on, especially if you think of, let's say, bigger home markets, going to in a production facility, production country where the circumstances are different. What we also experienced is, and that was, I think everybody can now understand, is that most of the suppliers, 90% of the suppliers, are still the same. So producing an EV car is not rocket science. I mean, there are some changes. A lot of the parts are the same, and as Juan said, I mean, most of the tier 1 suppliers are the same. What's of course is changing the localization. We talked about nearshoring yesterday quite a lot, but during the ramp up of these factories, when it comes from pre-serial production to, let's say, a serial production, there's a lot of a mix of, let's say, traditional global inbound to local inbound. And I think the key lesson should be that you really need a resilient, flexible supply chain for the inbound to ensure a proper ramp up, to ensure in-time serial production, to make everything possible. And I think therefore you need global partners, local partners, a flexible system for different modes of transportation, warehousing, of course. I think, as I see about naiveness of companies, you still need warehouses. I know nobody wants to store because it's banded capital, but especially in the ramp-up phase, it's inevitable to have a warehouse somewhere just to balance the inflexibility. And I think last but not least, the battery supply chain is very essential, because that's the big differentiator when it comes from ICE vehicle into electric vehicle. So to ensure this critical component, it's the most expensive one, it's the one which is production critical, so therefore this should have a priority in regards to other components.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. Some great insights there. David, excuse me, I want to come to you. DP World have been supporting high-profile EV manufacturers for a number of years now, particularly with cars and container solutions, but also other solutions too. What are some of the EV nuances and complexities and best practices for handling such vehicles?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. So DP World has been moving cars and containers since 1993, and we've been moving EVs and containers since 2013. So we have a fair amount of experience in doing this. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of difference between moving the two different types of vehicles and containers. Not surprisingly to the group, EVs are heavier than cars. They're 30 to 50% heavier. No surprise there. What was interesting to me when I first learned it was that EVs are classified as dangerous goods.
ICE vehicles are not, even though they have fluids and gas and some of those things in them. But what we do at DP World, which is different than what almost everybody else does who moves cars and containers, we have a proprietary racking system where we double rack cars, be they ICE or be they EVs, and we can put as many as 6 cars in a 53-foot container, which of course for the OEMs lowers their cost per VIN, something that's very important to them. A traditional person or someone who's not as competent at cars and containers as we are will put 2 cars on the floor of a container and ship it off. So 2 to 6 is a big deal. Obviously, that depends on what models are in the car, in the container, and how big they are. But by and large, the only other thing that you really have to pay attention to when you're shipping EVs is they'll come to us to be shipped with, say, 30 to 50% battery charge. And when they get to the other end, wherever that is, they need to come to a port where there's sufficient battery charging capability. So if you're shipping cars and containers and it's 20 cars, probably not a problem. If you're shipping a whole bunch of cars, if it's a few hundred cars, you need to make sure you go to a port where you can have the proper charging capacity, because there are times where batteries die in transit. If it happens in cars and containers, it's an easy problem to solve. If it happens on a ro-ro vessel, it could prevent a lot of other vehicles from being unloaded. The same thing can be true if it's on a stack train. So that's another advantage of cars and containers.
Yeah, well, it's an excellent point there, and picking kind of up on that battery, the global battery supply chain. There's generally a lack of standardization at present, and so with different shippers utilizing different state of charges, having different regulations or a lack of regulation about how to import, export, handle them, and best practice there. Is this going to cause potential inefficiencies, potential challenges, perhaps beyond what you've been mentioning there? And Christian, I'll come to you on that one.
Yeah, so I think we have to differ, and it's between the battery within the vehicle and the battery itself. And it's also quite interesting to see, first of all, there are regulations, but there are no regulations, especially for batteries. So everything comes under dangerous goods. We have UN numbers which covering them, and therefore actually it should be clear. So for ocean transportation, actually it's very standardized. For the land transportation worldwide, it's also not such a big deal when it comes to the battery movement. When we go to the warehousing, it's a real mess worldwide. Every country, every county has different security requirements. Even 5 kilometers away, one counter to the other has complete different security standards to store the battery. So that's where we're struggling, where our customers are struggling, because it gives you not the, let's say, it takes you this planability away, and also increases the cost. So what I would appreciate if we have kind of, like it is for the packaging of battery, a global guideline that, okay, you can that's the recommended standard. That's the way how we should do. That would make it for everybody easier. And when it goes to air freight, it's anyway very, very tricky and complicated. And talking about the difference between the battery itself and the battery within the car, and that's also something what is actually astonishing. It's much easier to fly the same battery in the vehicle rather than the single battery itself. And I know we have some customers, they build dummy chassis around their prototype batteries just to have them fly it, because otherwise they won't be accepted. Same applies for transportation on train in China. You're not allowed to transport the batteries on the train, but the same battery in the vehicle, no problem at all. So that's also something where the whole industry, the economy itself, is lacking of experience. So we do see the last 1-2 years growing experience. So there is less, there are less resentments to overtake this. But it's a key, as I said before, it's really a key essential, and it has to be secured. But we are on the proper way, and I think having standards would be the right way for the planability and also to reduce the costs at the end of the day.
Yeah, excellent.
So, Richard, one thing that I would add here is, so let me say something, make a general statement. One of the things about the transition to EV is that we're not following what I would call a normal curve, normal adoption curve. right? So if you think about something, I'll use an example that everybody can understand, a cell phone. If you're old enough like I am to remember when cell phones first came out, they were small, they were expensive, they were awful. You paid for every text you sent, you paid for every call you made or you received. Over time, the cell phone got better. And as the cell phone got better, because the technology improved, the cell phone cost itself went down and so did the service. Now we all carry a cell phone that looks like this. And it does way more than just make calls and texts. And it's incredibly cheaper. The service that you pay for is far cheaper than, you just buy a plan. You don't pay for calls and texts. It's all wrapped in. It's a big difference. Well, that was what I would call a normal adoption curve. What's happened with EVs because of the environmental push by governments around the world is we have distorted the adoption curve. And that's what leaves us in this conundrum where all of us are, which is, well, how fast is it going to come? Originally it was we're going to be all EV by 2030. I don't think anybody thinks that today. We don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be all EV by 2030. So as we look to the future, and we try to conquer all these things like having common standards, the next leap, I think, in EV is going to be solid-state batteries, right? Solid-state battery is cheaper, it's lighter, it charges quickly, it has a lot of advantage over the lithium-ion that we use today. When solid-state comes in, the stuff that Christian said, which is entirely accurate today, will that even be relevant? Probably not. And the forecast for solid state is anywhere between 2026 and 2030. That will push us on a different adoption curve because the way consumers buy today, buying a car that is more than you need or want is a luxury. Most people buy a car on price. So if you're shopping today for a car, whether it's an EV versus an ICE vehicle, what a consumer wants to know for the most part is which car is cheaper, which one's cheaper to buy and which one's cheaper to operate. And that depends a lot on your situation. But I think as we move forward, a lot of the questions that we have in EVs, as the technology catches up, just like it did with the cell phone, a lot of these things are going to answer themselves. That's my point.
Yeah, please.
And if I may, adding on David and Christian's comments, so I would give a few takeaways, starting with the students. So if you can help us have batteries smaller and lighter, delivering the same amount of energy, that's called gravimetric energy, please, you would become billionaire. So that's a great area to focus on. Second, definitely an EV has 40% less moving parts than an ICE vehicle. So that's really interesting. And maintenance-wise, that's 30% less that you would spend on maintenance on your car or your truck. So definitely that's a great perspective and something to look at when you're buying a vehicle. So that's called total cost of ownership. So when you see that as a whole, that's something interesting. But also thinking on batteries, currently 90% of the batteries that we use on vehicles are made in China. As regional value content for Mexico and USMCA ramps up, looking towards 2026 USMCA review, you will have a lot of battery companies with their SOPs within the next couple of years. So that's a really interesting supply chain opportunity to hop on and surf that tsunami. It's not going to be a wave, it's going to be a tsunami. We're ramping up a factory in Mississippi in 2027, so definitely that's worth looking at. And at the end, I think definitely EVs and ICE vehicles, they are different options on a portfolio to decarbonize, so definitely that's something worth looking at if you're thinking on consumer vehicles or capital goods. That's a different take. So I think there's two ways of saying things. Light vehicles, commercial vehicles. It goes a different way. And also Mexico as a production hub and Mexico as a domestic market. So definitely Mexico as a production hub has big, wide opportunities for EVs, not only for North America, but also to Latin America. Mm-hmm. Just recall, Mexico is a country with the most FTAs, 15, allowing you to have access to 50 different countries. So that's something worth looking at as well.
Yeah, excellent points there. And picking up on the point about the USMCA, Mexico's trade agreements, and you touched upon how that's going to influence localization, nearshoring. I'm interested, and I'll come to you, Juan, to understand how you're planning and preparing your supply chain here in Mexico, some considerations there, and then I'm open up to the group to the other considerations about the development of a localized EV supply chain.
It's definitely a factor, I tell you that. If we didn't know back at the beginning of the year what was going to be the scope of the Mexican government regarding EVs, as you know, we used to import EVs without an import tax. This was back from 2006. Just weren't available back then. And until the last day of September this year, we still were able to import those vehicles. The signal that we got when that import tax increased from 0 to 15% was clear, in the sense that we need to do some kind, or it's a big portion of the car with local content. Thankfully enough, local content involves 3 different big countries, so we're in this side. And as you mentioned, battery is definitely the most important part of the car, whether it's now lithium-ion or it's going to be solid state, which I agree with you on that thesis. That's what we're looking forward. Everything else, Mexico is already a huge automotive hub. So everything you want to build a vehicle, you can find here locally. But the battery itself, also some participants are getting in that, as you said, tsunami very quickly. That's our main focus now. The car itself is not complicated, as we said. It's pretty much a cell phone on wheels. That's how I explain it. But we need to find, and we're actively looking for a local solution for battery supply, because that will solve any import tax issues, any localization needs. And to be honest, we're not concerned. We see a lot of participants getting into the game. International participants, local participants, and even now we're testing out some local technologies that we're pretty sure is going to work. So again, I am confident that the EV evolution is inevitable, and I'm confident that Mexico will step up to bring those local production needs to have a local enough content to make those vehicles available all through America, from Mexico all the way up to Canada.
Yeah, please.
And quick take on that, definitely. Think on light vehicles, it's a 1.5 million vehicle market in Mexico. Commercial vehicles is a 39,000, sorry. So definitely scales are different, massification is different. And as Christian was saying, most tier 1s and tier 2s are the same for a lot of companies. So if you're looking to, let's say, start up some business or ramp up a new supply opportunity, maybe take a look at supplying commercial vehicle business. Why? Because of volume. Why? Because it's easier to sell maybe 40,000 components instead of 1,500 to Nissan and then 500,000 to BMW and so on. So that's a good opportunity as well to look at. For example, in Mexico, out of those 39,000 vehicles being sold in Mexico, last year we sold the amazing number of 22 EVs. So definitely that's a good way to start up small and grow organically.
Yeah, some great points there. And keen to delve into a little bit further in terms of what Mexico needs to do, what is critical in terms of infrastructure, in terms of talent, to prepare and to ready for that ramp up of electrification. At the beginning, I mentioned a number of car makers either planning or already producing. That volume will grow, as we know. More players are coming into the market, even on this panel, and some starting small but growing as well. Plans to grow bigger. So, yeah, what are some of the other considerations that the network needs to look at and are most critical in your opinion? David, I'll come to you.
So our experience here in Mexico is that there has to be enough labor to support the growth that's coming, because there is a lot of growth coming, both with OEMs and suppliers, and as Javier had said, battery suppliers. There has to be enough labor, and they have to be properly trained and skilled. One of the things that's unique to Mexico is that you have to provide transportation in many cases to get the employees to work. The infrastructure doesn't necessarily support that, meaning bus routes and those sorts of things. Mexico is also, some of our automakers on the outbound side have issues with theft and vandalism that need to be dealt with. And of course, as we've already all spoken about, there will be some coming changes in what the trade looks like, and we're all going to have to adapt to that. Now, those are all substantial changes, but Mexico is in a very good place to conquer all those changes. And one of the things that you can never discount when you're talking about a geographic area for whatever reasons is where you're located. And Mexico is a fantastic location for what's happening here, and that cannot be replicated.
And I would also consider this change from ICE to EV as an opportunity for the Mexican market, just also to invest in R&D, to focus on other export markets. This change coming from a pure production bench location into a more research development, into more active with local supplying and delivering and exporting to other markets. And as he said, I mean, it's a perfect location, not only looking north, but also especially looking south and for overseas.
That's a great point of topic to talk about. So definitely, what we see, and this is in the it's being touched within the high-level economic dialogue between the U.S. and Mexico. It's how do we upskill and reskill the automotive industry workforce. So definitely, as EVs come in Mexico, you're now talking about not a non-moving engine and on ice, but you're talking on a high-voltage battery, and that's dangerous, even if it's off, if it's charged. So definitely what we've been talking with the Ministry of Education and the Department of Education in the US is how do we have this dual education system or certification, which would the government actually certify the knowledge and the different topics and classes that people take at different levels on the school system so that they can actually move around Mexico and they have a certification, and that could work for ZEV, for BMW, Audi, and for Packard. So definitely that's something we're looking at and something that we're pitching to the government. We have a big mobility, I wouldn't say problem, but topic within the region. So some of our technicians get paid 3-to-1 when moving to the US. So if now they have such knowledge, they would be even more attractive to go to the US, which is a market that has evolved faster than Mexico on EV automotive industry-wise. So this is something really interesting to look at, especially if you see it as a region. Mexico, US, and Canada have almost the same population as the whole European Union. Yeah. So it's a one-to-one market. So if we see this as a whole region and we have this homologation, standardization of knowledge, that will be something really interesting. We're talking with CONACYT and with CEP and different entities within the government to try to achieve that and upscale the workforce.
Yeah, some great points there. I would, we still have some time, but I'm encouraging the audience to get involved as well. So if you do have questions, please do put your hand up and take advantage of our expertise on the panel here. But while you're thinking of that, I will carry on and want to turn our attention to charging infrastructure, a big topic. David, you already alluded to it a little bit about at the ports, but Juan, and perhaps I'll come to you first on this one because Seven and other EV car makers like Tesla, BYD, JAC are members of the Electromovilidad Association, which is driving electrification in Mexico. What are you doing? What's the organization doing to promote and encourage and accelerate the development of charging infrastructure here in Mexico, both publicly but also then privately?
Definitely, and it's a great effort. EMA, the Electromobility Association, or the translation to Spanish, Electromovilidad Asociación, is the first association promoted by most of the OEMs that are actively participating in the EV scope in Mexico. And the first important thing was visibility. Where are we right now? How many chargers? How many public chargers? How many private chargers? How many really fully EV vehicles that we have out there? How many PHEVs we have out there? And now, through EMA, we published quarterly information, both that lets us know that we're still very young. The total amount of public EV chargers that we have tracked from all the members that are part of EMA are only 33,000 chargers. When you compare that to millions in the US, or even more in China, it gives you a sense that we have a long way to go. Tracking it is the first challenge, and I think we got that covered as we grow with the members of that association. The next challenge, and Mexico is quite unique, is we don't have one single EV connector, and that's a wonderful challenge. I mean, the US has one, Europe is migrating to one, and we have European, we have NACS, North America, we have GVT, the Chinese, we have even CHAdeMO, which I think no one makes CHAdeMO anymore. And although we don't promote it, it's an ongoing discussion locally, we do think that going the way the US did and choosing only one connector will allow that to grow quicker. Yes, EV owners charge in their home more than they do in the street, but it is a necessity. And as the EVs grow more popular and people begin to use them in long travels, public charging will allow for the EV, scope of economy to grow a little bit more. So the first challenge is, again, information. We have that covered. Members make up 100% of the ecosystem of the passenger vehicle EV and publish that information there. Two, one of the beauties about EVs is visibility. We know where they are, we know where they go, we know the speeds, the hustles. So that allows us to quickly identify those places that we need public charge. And I think we're going to address those quickly. First, because it's a good business. And two, because it's going to be, again, the UIOs of EVs are going to grow quickly. So what I will say is, first task is information. Second task is hopefully between all EV importers and producers sometime somewhere, we can get an agreement in terms of what is going to be that unique charger that can allow us to use US public charging, Canada public charging, and eventually South America public charging. That would be the idea.
Yeah, excellent. And yeah, please.
That's really interesting. Definitely the Mexican registry of electric charging stations has those 3,300 charging stations, but out of those, only 3 to 5% are accessible for a commercial vehicle. Most of them are on a shopping center or on a place that's not accessible for a big truck. So definitely that's part of the challenges, but also let's take a look at supply and intermittence of energy. So this is something that the Ministry of Energy has to address. And a couple of days ago, President Sheinbaum just addressed this. So this is something that we're looking at, and we're working with her to see how we can scale it up and also see which one is the source of electricity. Is it natural gas or is it a green source of electricity? But also, I would say also part of the challenge is let the states talk to each other to standardize their requirements to set up an electric charging stations. It is different if you want to set up one in Nuevo León than in Veracruz and in Puebla. So that makes it different to massificate and scale up that. And on the second part, I would say, let's think on corridors, passenger vehicle corridors or commercial vehicle corridors. And let's think about these USMCA corridor all the way up to Canada. So let's not hope that we don't get to the point that we have an electric corridor coming down from California and Oregon and Washington State, and then suddenly the electric corridor in Mexico starts up in Nuevo León. So we need to talk to each other to make sure that this is we see this picture as a whole.
Yeah, and Christian, David, I want to come to you as global providers with end-to-end coverage of the supply chain. In terms of that charging infrastructure and accessibility, where does the responsibility lie? Is it at the ports? Is it with the carriers? Is it with the car makers to make that investment, or is it a government investment? And is it a case of everyone is waiting for someone else to make that investment to take that cost on? Is that holding the movement back?
I think it's a good business. It's for everybody. We should not wait until the government is providing something. And I think the beauty of this electrification, we already have this electric infrastructure. We just have to adapt it. We have to make it possible to charge wherever. And I just want to add something, but we also have to adapt and to rethink the charging behavior, because it's naive. And I mean, talking just out by myself, switching for 1.5 years from an ICE to an electric vehicle, you cannot expect to have the same service, price, comfortness switching from one to the other product. You have to adapt your behavior, and then you will immediately profit from the advantages of it, and that's. It's even more for the electric trucks. We are also currently working with different models, let's say out-of-the-box thinking with a swap battery trailer. When you have waiting times, you can use that time. You can use that time, the time for loading, unloading, and coming back. The terminal is a great place because the truck's standing there anywhere. You can charge. So also it's also on us or everybody to provide this charger infrastructure, and I think this is essential to make it as easy as accessible as possible everywhere. And I think that's part of everybody. And as Juan said, it's a nice business, because not only that's also one thing is still missing, the visibility of the costs. Because if you charge nowadays, there are different cost models with different providers. It's completely, out of the blue. We are not so far to see, okay, I charge, I pay a kilowatt hour, and it's running down like at a gas station. I think this could be the next step, because then you also immediately see the impact and the advantage of it. And I think we're working on that, and as a logistics provider, we're also interested, together with our hauliers, to provide such an environment and take advantage of it. And I think it's really low level to implement those, and we shouldn't wait for anybody to do so.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, please, David.
So, Richard, I have the perspective that I think, as Christian has just said, everybody should invest in EV infrastructure. That is one of the things that is holding back, if you will, widespread adoption of EVs on the consumer side. And in the United States, where I'm from, when an EV can be recharged as easily as you can refuel an ICE car, that's when it will take off. Today, that's not possible. If you live in the United States, the best possible situation that you can have if you want to have an EV is you have a charger at home and your employer has a charger. Never have a problem. Okay, well, if your employer doesn't have a charger but you have one at home, you probably still never have a problem. Now, what if you live in an apartment? Now you have a problem, because you rely on public charging, and public charging varies in terms of the speed, and sometimes if you go to a charging location, you'll have to wait in line to charge your car. And those things are holding it back. But as we had discussed earlier...
Or it might not work, right?
Or it might not work, right? But as we discussed earlier, as you see the technology improve and solid-state batteries come that are quick charging, right? That'll take care of the part of the problem, because you won't have to charge your vehicle overnight or for hours. All of this is coming. Before I came here for the conference, I was in the UK, and one of the things that they do in London that's really interesting is they've converted light poles into chargers. There's already electricity there.
Telephone booth, yeah.
Which is a no-brainer, but as we move forward in time, we're going to have more of these.
It's also, if you go to the Netherlands or to Norway, I mean, at every supermarket you have the possibility to charge for free. It's really low level, low accessibility, to make it as more comfortable as possible. And then if you live that, then you see the advantage, and then you take the advantage out of it. And I think, there are enough possibilities which are actually low-brainer, but somebody has to do it.
Excellent. So last couple of questions. So if there is someone with a burning question, please speak now, or you'll have to catch our experts in the break or later in the day. But maybe a last couple from me, and I think affordability has really become a major priority for car makers, for manufacturers, as they transition their portfolios to EVs, hybrids, alternatively fuel vehicles. So there's greater pressure, greater scrutiny on logistics and supply chain to reduce costs and really becoming an enabler to accelerate the adoption of EVs and bring them to market. So I'm keen to understand, from logistics providers' perspective first, but then our manufacturing providers, how are you working to really reduce those costs and to support this transition so that EV supply chains can be as competitive as traditional?
I mean, as I mentioned before, if you copy-paste the current setup in the supply chain with the same setup towards an electric one, it won't be cheaper, or you won't save any costs in the next couple of years. Therefore, and that's what we're currently doing, that's what a lot of our customers are doing, we have to adapt the supply chain according to these needs. So, for example, if you build shuttles, then you have to rebuild the inbound, so you can easily onboard new technologies, which has a big advantage because you have much longer price stability, because if you're not depending on the fuel price, which is a big factor, especially when it comes to inbound trucking. So if you can stabilize this for long-term contracting, for an adapted supply chains, which is, let's say, tailor-made to certain EV trucking solutions, then you can generate a profit out of it. And on top, if you generate your own electricity by solar panels, there's enough space on roofs, on logistics facilities, on production facilities. You can really generate a value circle around, and I think that's, in the long term, and this total cost of ownership, that's then the real gain. You won't gain a profit just replacing a truck for providing an inbound from A to B. That won't happen. So you have to see the whole picture, and you have to plan in a long term.
Excellent. Yeah, David, your perspective on what DP World is doing to really drive competitiveness.
Christian's right. I think I'll make one brief comment so we can hear from the manufacturers before we're over, but no one in logistics has ever heard the phrase from a customer, don't worry about reducing costs this year. Right? It doesn't matter what you're doing, and cost downs are mandatory every
That's our
year.
tagline for next year, by
I
the way.
mean, that is honestly the truth. So go ahead, you guys.
Definitely. I would say I would part my answer in two ways. So first one, you need political goodwill. Second, economies of scale. And third, sophistication of customers to fast forward with EV adoption. And second, we see this as a path to move forward. And what we see is we have early adopters, such as Trayecto. Kudos again to those guys. Then we have regulations and regulated markets. So that's what's happening with CARV in California, where you have access or something extra or a benefit for having an EV or a decarbonized vehicle. And third, it's market-driven, which is what we've achieved in Europe, for example, where you buy your EV car because you like it. So definitely light vehicles are a different stage than commercial vehicles, but that's the path to go. And I would say the ramp-up would go when we head up to the regulated part of it.
Yeah, excellent. And Juan, final comment from you, just to bring it home.
Very quick, we believe, and that's how we began the business a year and a half ago, that availability will facilitate accessibility. And what do we mean that? We brought to Mexico the cheapest EV in the market. I haven't seen the FX today, but I think it should be around 10,000 US. That's the current price of the cheapest EV. And we try to push people to that mix that you just said. Yes, the EV. Yes, of course, the solar panels. And if you get that mix of technology that is now available, you can buy all of these products through your cell phone. Then your cost of transportation and your cost of living when it comes to energy translates to zero. So having that ecosystem makes perfect sense. And again, it's because availability is there. Now it's so within reach of all the participants now in the logistics network.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we have run out of time. I think this discussion could go on for the whole afternoon, but we will let our audience, who've been very well behaved, very attentive, go get some coffee, refresh and refuel, because we've got plenty still to come on our agenda as well. But ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to our panel. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.